Bueno, pues sin más retraso, y por favor, quería solo tomarme unos segundos para dar gracias a los patrocinadores, porque de todas las conferencias que tenemos en EmTech a lo largo de todo el mundo, en España es donde tenemos que hacer un esfuerzo para que una actividad como esta siga celebrándose, y creedme que no es nada fácil, así que el soporte que hemos tenido ha sido muy agradecido. Y en un sitio como este, precisamente, es más importante que en cualquier otro reforzar el mensaje de que invertir en ciencia, que invertir en innovación y en emprendedurismo es fundamental para el futuro económico y el futuro social de nuestro país. Así que quería dar las gracias a los patrocinadores y ya dar la bienvenida al primer panel, en el que vamos a hablar del futuro de las ciudades inteligentes, y que lo va a moderar Ken Larson, que es el director del grupo Changing Places del MIT Media Lab. Un aplauso para Ken, por favor.
Buenos días. So I would like to talk about technology today, but first go back in time. We like to start not with technology, but with first principles and start with people. Before I was an architect, I was an anthropologist, and so I want to take you through a very brief history of the city. So settlements often started like this, around a scarce resource, like a well or a river or a harbor or a hilltop. And they were human scale. They were limited in size to how far that woman could walk with a pot of water on her head. And you can see this when you fly over rural Indias, like Germany in this case, or India. You see a series of villages. They're all roughly a mile apart. 20 or 30-minute walk between them. And then these villages began to form small cities. And you can see that they have a center. They're denser in the center. They're often about a kilometer in diameter. They have food production outside the city, some for emergencies inside the city. And you can literally find hundreds of examples of these human-scale settlements where most of what most people needed in life was within a 20-minute walk. You can see it with the original plan for Valencia. And then things started to change with industrialization. You had factories that were dirty and noisy. They moved to the perimeter of the city. Energy production was centralized, as was healthcare. Learning was centralized in schools. You had sewer, water networks that allowed for this unchecked expansion. You had rail networks that allowed people to live farther away from the city. You had the automobile, which became mass-produced in 1908, and that changed everything, and this is where we ended up. So that's my short history of the city. You have now hundreds of new cities that are being built that are low density. They are concentrate isolated functions, such as healthcare in one area and housing in another. They're separated by highways. There are roughly 3 parking spaces to every person, and this does not scale, and we're running into severe urbanization problems. You can see this pattern in Mexico City. You can see it in China. I was in Beijing last week, and it is tower sprawl, but it's sprawl nonetheless. And the traffic problems that you're finding, whether you're talking about Beijing or Shanghai or Sao Paulo or Riyadh, is really unsustainable. This is Beijing. I took it out of a taxi window on a very good day because there's green and yellow on the sign. There's no red. And when I was in Beijing last week, the pollution levels were off the chart. The highest on the scale was 300. Pollution levels was at 395. It was literally difficult to breathe. It would burn your eyes, burn your nose. It's not sustainable. They're building new cities like crazy, and they tend to be these ghettos. They may be very expensive, but they're ghettos like this, super blocks with only housing, entirely dependent on the automobile. A very dysfunctional pattern. And these cities are tending to become lower and lower density as they sprawl. So let's talk about density for a minute. Density is very interesting because as cities get larger, that horizontal scale, you tend to have good things and bad things that follow in parallel. So the good things in this case are investment in R&D, patents, GDP, but the bad things are things like AIDS cases and crime. And in fact, if you look at the data, you find that cities that have very dense urban cores tend to have a lot of good things. They have more skilled people, they have higher wages, greater innovation, more organizations involved in science and technology and the arts, and significantly lower water and energy consumption per capita. But you tend to find a lot of bad things associated as well. You tend to find increased noise, congestion, pollution, loss of contact with nature, crime, disease, and drug use. So a lot of our research recently has been, how can we have the good things that come with density? Paris is actually a very dense city, far denser than Beijing, without all the bad things that come if you do it in a poor way like Bangalore. We have a series of urban interventions that we've been working on that I'd like to spend a minute and talk about. So number one is we believe you should make cities out of micro-cities, much like these, the patterns that you find in the cities that were designed before industrialization. Paris shows that pattern. It was a series of villages, these 20 arrondissements that came together. Each has their own identity. They have a center. And if you look at the amenities for daily life, it's very interesting. Every little dot there is a cafe. There's almost nowhere in Paris that has where you're more than a 2 or 3 minute walk from a cafe or a shop or physicians or pharmacies. Chinese cities do just the opposite. They concentrate all the housing over here and make people move across the city. That's one of the reasons you have the horrible traffic problems that you have in Beijing. So our proposal for the new cities is very simple. You just concentrate the density into micro-cities. They're about roughly a kilometer in diameter. You provide most people with what they need in life within a few minute walk. You network these together, sort of a mesh network. You bring the cars around the perimeter, but you provide alternatives in each of these micro-cities. Maybe 20, 25,000 people live in each center. In each micro-city, the center concentrates the public functions. Very simple pattern. So, we've been experimenting with new ways of modeling it, and we're actually going down to a tiny scale for that. We're using Lego bricks. This is the basic unit of the city the way we're modeling it. It's a Lego unit. Lego happens to be one of our sponsors, but we might use Legos anyway. So with that Lego unit, you can map data. You can map revenue, activities, people, construction costs, vehicles, vegetables. That small yellow unit, if it's retail, might be mapped to 2 employees or 300 customers per day. And we can rapidly prototype cities using these Lego units. At the same time, we're building computational models. So in this case, yellow is retail, black is housing, white is office, beige is research, etc. We experimented with this process with a new city in China, Nansha, between Guangzhou and Hong Kong. And we built these compact urban cells, these neighborhoods out of the Lego units. These all have very high density. They're all using the same basic program, but very different parties. And we not only map data to each of these units, but we can map experiences to their assembly. So we've been looking at strategies where we can increase the density and increase the quality of life and reduce resource consumptions. So we've been looking for interesting precedents. I'll just show you a few. This is Roppongi Hills in Tokyo, which is one of my favorite examples. You have the streetscape with the shops, the Gucci's and the Pradas, all accessible on the streetscape. Up above, you have an upper level terrace where you have gardens and terraces for restaurants and the housing and the hotels. And then you have these functional spaces, the towers that sort of exist in background. And you can end up with a high-density city that has the experience of a much lower density city. This is the upper level platform for that Roppongi Hill development, very peaceful. We also have been looking at pathways. This is one of my favorite examples, Boulder, Colorado. You can go from one end of the city to the other without interacting with a highway or with a street. You see, you dip down under the streets like a superhighway for bikers and joggers. New York City has much the same strategy with the High Line, this old industrial rail line that was elevated that's now a beautiful park. You can walk through lower Manhattan away from all the craziness of the city. In Seoul, Korea, they had an elevated highway. They decided that didn't make sense to run through the center of the city. They took it down, reclaimed the river, and it's this beautiful, poetic, peaceful promenade all the way through the city with Seoul, Korea happening around it. You have that here in Valencia. Yesterday I rode all along the park. I shot this video. It's much the same. Actually, it's one of my favorite urban spaces that I have experienced recently. It's really beautiful. Beautiful day, and people everywhere. So I think there's some great examples. This was one of the original plans where they were to put a highway in the riverbed. I'm really glad that they chose a more rational solution to it. In Boston, we had an elevated highway. We took it down. Unfortunately, we put cars back, so it's one of the great missed opportunities in urban planning history. As a result, you have basically a little green strip, which is a traffic island. Okay, but that's my first intervention, city of microcities. The second, mobility on demand. The sharing economy is a profound transition we're going through right now. This is our image of mobility on demand, all the different modes. You see the most important one is the one up here. You privilege walking. You design walkable cities. Here in Europe, you know how to do that. Your cities are, at least the older parts, are designed for walking. Then you have this mix of modes which are all shared. You have the shared bikes, but we also think you should have a whole ecosystem of shared vehicles that are available to you, so the right trip at the right time in the right place. Just a few examples. The ones in red are the ones we're working on, by the way, the new vehicles that we're designing. In China, where I was last week, I noticed a lot of these three-wheel vehicles. Poor people zip along in the bike lanes. Rich people sit in traffic in their Audi A6s. And so we're trying to design new vehicles that might be fun and cool to ride in bike lanes. This is a little electric vehicle. It meets the European Union regulations for a bike lane vehicle. We've been experimenting with different strategies to encourage people to use more sustainable modes. We call it a persuasive electric vehicle because it persuades people to shift modes and to get more exercise. We're working on different vehicle architectures. We would have it fold up to a very compact form, so it uses very little space on the street, so important in a high-density city. Last year at Brussels, at the European Union headquarters, we launched this vehicle, the City Car project, which has robotic wheels. You get rid of the engine transmission, so you can do things like fold. The front door opens, you step directly out onto the curb. This is the vehicle is being produced actually in the Basque region of Spain here. I hope they make it. The economy here in Spain is tough, but we're now talking with several producers in China to do a version 2.0 of this vehicle. This is our launch at Brussels with at the EU headquarters. Anyway, that's an old project for us. The new one that we're working on, the 2.0 version, is autonomous vehicle. This is, again, the cover of The Economist, self-driving cars. We don't really believe in the Google vision of autonomous vehicles. We don't believe in heavy 3,000-pound electric vehicles. We believe in these three concepts coming together: autonomy, car sharing, and electrification. That's a very powerful concept. And in fact, if a car can park itself and charge itself and fold, we can get something like a 5-to-1 ratio, which is extraordinary in a city when they're stored, for example, at night. In our vision, the car comes to you. You can drive it to your destination. You get out of it wherever you want, and then it goes on its way. prepositions itself. If you have driverless cars in the city, it's very important that that interface be well conceived. If you have no driver to make eye contact with, we think the vehicle actually should make eye contact and signal to you its intentions. So this has been a lot of fun to play with these concepts. And eventually, we will get rid of the human, because humans are incredibly dangerous in cars. There's something like 1 million people killed every year globally with automobiles. We can reduce that maybe to 10% if you get humans out of the loop. And then that will come. Space on demand, another concept that we're working on. We're very interested that young people are getting priced out of central cities where young people need to be because they're the creative lifeblood in many of these cities. So we're working on very small micro apartments that can transform. So a small apartment functions as if it's much larger. It can convert from living to dining to party to workspace, et cetera. We've been working on very natural ways of doing this. This is a project for a developer in Manhattan that converts by having walls that translate, beds and tables that go up. The wall comes forward in this case. We've been experimenting with the interface for moving heavy objects. We think when you go up to a wall to move out of the way, you should just kind of very naturally move it aside. We like to do living lab experiments. This is an apartment that we built where we're testing the workability and the acceptance of these types of strategies. In this case, we build a bed that goes up to the ceiling. This is actually more difficult than you might think to get the interface right. So the apartment can convert from a living space to a bedroom and dramatically increasing the functionality. We've been experimenting with the same thing in the workplace with little high-tech work carrels that are transformable, that can be arranged in multiple ways and increase the productivity and the experience of people in the workplace. Urban food on demand. This is our newest project. It's being driven by this realization that food security is maybe the most important challenge facing mankind. Climate change seen posing risks to food supplies. This was New York Times 3 days ago. I like to garden. This is my harvest from last month. This is my little urban garden, but that does not scale. This kind of industrial food production does not scale. We built this lab in the last few months to test urban food technologies. On the left, we have new high-tech hydroponic systems that we're testing. To the right, aeroponics, where the root balls are misted. We think that we can eventually skin buildings built for other purposes with a very light layer of food production. All of this might serve a market. We're finding, these are preliminary numbers, that you can get 97 times the productivity out of a given piece of land if the food production is 1 story high like this. Uses 90% less water, 93% less CO2 if you consider the whole food chain, much less fertilizer. The fifth intervention we're interested in is energy, resilient energy. This is a non-resilient system. This is Manhattan that blacked out. Those little circles are the neighborhoods, those neighborhoods like I described, Greenwich Village, Chelsea, et cetera. We think that we can have each of those cells designed as a resilient microgrid. So if one cell goes out, it doesn't impact the others. We can have a DC bus. We can plug in renewables and electric vehicle batteries. We're looking at sensor networks in buildings and at the scale of the city to collect very fine-grained information about electrical consumption, activities of people, movement of people. This is our instrumented media lab. Each little symbol there is a sensor collecting data. Ultimately, we're interested in seeing how we can use these new systems to create better experiences for people, at the same time dramatically reduce energy consumption. In this case, we have these tunable LED lights. This is a project with Siemens. Blue light uses 30% less energy. By recognizing activities and tuning the color and the intensity of the light, we can dramatically reduce the energy consumption. What we're testing now is, do people like it? Of course, what we're finding is young people love it and baby boomers tend to hate it. So it's very complicated. But we think there's tremendous potential here and we can dramatically save energy. We've also Now, decided this. I think we have a lot of good ideas for the city. A lot of people have a lot of good ideas. I actually don't think that's the problem. Lack of solutions, lack of technologies. I think the problem is really a lack of a decision support system to help stakeholders make decisions about how to integrate all of these new systems into the city. I think this is absolutely essential to take it to scale. So to that end, we have developed what we call the Cityscope. It has two purposes. One, it's a real-time data observatory, and secondly, it's an urban intervention simulator. And I'll show you what I mean. This is from a movie. Some of you may have seen this movie, Avatar. I pulled out this little clip because I quite like it. It actually shows people standing around a table, looking at very complex three-dimensional information, discussing it, looking at alternatives. Of course, in this case, they were trying to, kill people. I think we can use similar strategies to design cities. So back to the Legos. This is now how we're using Lego bricks. We're modeling cities conceptually with the Lego bricks. We have an array of projectors that can project information to any surface. We have tools tangible tools to allow non-experts, like a mayor or a planner or a CEO of a company, look at alternatives. The essence of this, people standing, we don't like headsets, we don't like these simulation tools that operate on screens. That's really for a single person. We think these collaborative decision support systems are much better. We're developing the ability to scan the three-dimensional model, update the computational model and all the simulations in real time, reproject that information, and hopefully come to a consensus about how to integrate all these systems. We're also looking at new ways of dynamically reconfiguring the model of the city. This is the work of Hiroshi Ishii. Little pins that go up and down. And we can use many of these same strategies that we've now developed for our Cityscope to look at alternatives for the city, look how they might evolve over time. It's actually quite interesting. We're looking also at now bringing all kinds of new data sets, big data, into the study of cities. Every little dot here is a mobile phone moving in the city. This is some of the work of my colleague, Sandy Pentland, looking at nightlife behavior in San Francisco. So based on pickup, drop-off points, destinations in the city at night, you can classify people as to their member of a nightlife tribe. And if you have some additional information about their profile, there are all kinds of interesting correlations that one can make. You can map that back onto the city, and what we found is people not only tend to exhibit the same mobility behaviors, but they tend to buy the same cell phones, they tend to have the same diseases. All this information actually can be visualized in real time, we think, in the city to help decision makers make decisions. This is Shanghai, which is a static model. This is Chicago. This is Boston. We think ultimately we can replace these static models with three-dimensional real-time displays, looking at movement of people and vehicles and goods and all kinds of things to help people make better decisions. In the end, we have to remember, though, it's not about the technology, it's about the people. And I believe that we should focus on designing cities for people rather than the current process of designing for machines. Thank you.